everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my favourite books of 2023. In the past, I've done both a best books of the year and also a worst/most disappointing books of the year. However, this year I was looking through my Goodreads challenge. So far I've read 58 books this year and I'm hoping to get to 60 by the end of December. So when I was looking for like my worst books, my most disappointing books, I've honestly not got that many, and I don't think I would be able to film a video about them because, well, firstly, it gets me very annoyed to have to remember books that I didn't like, and secondly, there's really not a lot that I've given bad ratings this year. I've not given anything a 1 star and I've given out a few 2 stars, and I might give them a quick mention in my 2023 review that I'm planning on doing. But other than that, I think I'm just going to do a best books video because I've managed to get 10 out of the 58 that I've read so far that I really love. I've either given them a 5 star or a 4.5 star, but to be honest, there's not a lot of 5 stars that I've given this year anyway, so a 4.5 is as good as a 5 really. I've tried to put them in some kind of order, so let's start with number 10 on this list, which is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. In this book, we're following a couple called Leah and Mira, and Leah is a deep sea explorer. Leah has gone on this deep sea mission and she's been gone longer than she was meant to be gone, and we're basically following Miri as she is dealing with Leah's absence, but then also when Leah comes back she seems to be a little bit off. So it's a lot about their relationship. There's quite a lot of mystery, there's some body horror in here, and the reason that this is one of my favourites is because it's really well written. Some of the imagery about the ocean especially is so beautiful, and I really loved seeing the domestic side of Leah and Miri's relationship and just the small things that make their relationship so special. And it did make me cry at the end, so it definitely had that emotional pull as well. The reason why it wasn't a full 5 star is because there is quite a lot in this book that doesn't get answered, and some of the writing was a little bit too flowery at times. So this one has got my number 10 spot. Number 9 on my list is At Home with the Horrors by Sammy Scott. This is my favourite collection of short horror stories that I've ever read. Granted, I haven't read a ton, but this takes the top spot. So many of these stories reminded me a lot of Black Mirror. Some of the stories were so creepy. My favourite one is Something Else Entirely, which I gave an easy 5 star. Some of my other favourites were Scared Mary, Teresa, Becca, Catherine. There was quite a few that I really loved and would give like 4.5, 5 stars to, and I definitely want to read more from this author because I feel like his brand of horror is just very appealing to me. I think I gave this collection 4.5 stars overall, just because with a short story collection there's going to be some which I like less than others, but regardless, this was still a brilliant collection, and yeah, I'm definitely going to read some more from Sammy Scott. The next one on my list is a very recent read. It's actually the last book that I finished, and it's Migrations by Charlotte McConney, I think is how you say her name. This is a fiction sci-fi kind of book. We're following this woman called Franny who is basically obsessed with these Arctic birds, and she's basically made it her life mission to first find these birds, and she also needs to find somebody with a boat who will agree to take her right from the Antarctic down to Antarctica so that she can follow these birds on their last migration, or what is believed to be their last migration, because this is set in a society where a lot of animals have gone extinct. It also talks a lot about Franny's life and about her childhood and her marriage. I just loved the way it was written. There were so many quotes that I highlighted, and yeah, the ending just really got to me. I did read this book for my most recent vlog, so I will link that if you want to see me cry because I did film that, embarrassingly enough. But yeah, this book just left me feeling very sort of inspired, and it just warmed my heart but also made me really sad. I gave it a 4.5 stars, but it was very close to a 5. If you're into fiction that speculates what the future's going to be like and feels very humanizing, if that's the word, just puts your place in the world into perspective, then I think you would really enjoy this one. Next up on this list, I have Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is Eliza Clark's debut novel. I have since read Penance, which I also enjoyed, but it just didn't have quite the same effect on me as Boy Parts did. This is about a young woman called Irina who is basically super beautiful but is very horrible to everyone around her. She's quite toxic, but she's so compelling and interesting. I loved being in her head. She's basically on sick leave from her normal job as a bartender, and she's pursuing her art career, so she's trying to get into this exhibition. So it's about her looking through her old portfolios, but then also just following her life and seeing how she interacts with people. And I just thought that this book was so funny and so fun and very like current and modern. I feel like I sound very old saying that, but the way that this book uses pop culture was just so refreshing and so relatable, and I was just obsessed with the writing style, the tone of it all. I just couldn't stop reading, even though this is one of those books where not a lot happens, there's not a ton of plot, which usually I'm not the biggest fan of, but for some reason this just worked so well. I feel like I could read so many more pages in Irina's head. She was just so fascinating. It also felt super British as well, which is what I like about Eliza Clark's writing. My only issue with it is that I would have liked the ending to be slightly different. Everything else about this I was just in love with, and Eliza Clark is now an autobi author for me. So definitely give this one a go if you're into the unhinged, feminine rage kind of thing. The next book on this list is Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. And now I'm thinking about it, it's probably below this. I think I enjoyed this one a bit more, but yeah, it's still like somewhere in the middle somewhere. So this is a horror book that I believe originated on Reddit, and it started as a bunch of short connected stories that have since been turned into a full-length novel. So in this book we're following this man who's basically reminiscing on his childhood and some of the weird things that he remembers that he can't quite make sense of. And I thought this book was super creepy. It took me back to days where I used to play in the woods, and it was really creepy and scary. It's one of those horror books that focuses on stalking and feeling like you're being watched constantly. And the way that this book wraps up was so shocking and so heartbreaking to me. I did not see it going that way at all, but I really loved it because it properly took me by surprise. But just know that it does get pretty dark at the end, and also one of the most hard-hitting books that I've ever read, and I felt like I'd just been punched to the stomach once I realised what the ending was going to be. So yeah, one of my favourite horror books that I've read this year. In at number 5, and we're now moving up to the 5-star books that I've read this year. So the first one is Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. This is a bit of a funny one because I wouldn't widely recommend this book, but for some reason it just worked for me really well. So in this book we're following a guy called Wilder, and for the first 60-70 pages we're basically following this like coming of age story, and he meets 2 new friends and it's kind of about their summer together. And when I first read it I was so confused. I was like, is this really a horror book? Because this is giving me like YA coming of age, nothing's happening. And then when you get to like the 80-page mark is when things start taking a bit of a dark turn. And then for the rest of the book we're basically following a bunch of different perspectives, different timelines, and I feel like anyone would feel a little bit lost reading this and a bit confused as to what the whole point is. But for some reason I just could not stop reading. I read from page like 70 right to the end without stopping. I was just hooked, but I couldn't really tell why. And then when you get to the end and you realise what's actually been happening throughout this book, my jaw dropped. I was just amazed with how she's managed to put this book together. There's some weird chapters that just have brackets for the heading and just some random words, but then when you finally realise and you go back to those, then you will be so creeped out. The final page of this book gave me actual chills. I'm talking genuine shivers, and I don't think I've ever experienced that before, but something about the end of this book and how it all came together was just exactly what I like. I can see why people don't like this, especially if you're not a fan of the tropes that it uses at the end, but this gave me the same feeling that Behind Her Eyes gave me when I read that back in like 2021. And I know that is another sort of hit and miss book, but for some reason that kind of mysterious, is it paranormal, is it supernatural, just that hint of a speculative element, something about that just really clicks with my reading taste. So if you've tried to read this book and you thought it was a little bit weird and a little bit boring, try and push through until you get to at least like 80 pages in and then see how you feel. But yeah, I've seen people give this like 1 star, 2 star, 5 stars, and I just happen to be at the 5-star end of that. Like I say, I wouldn't recommend it for everybody, but I definitely would give it a go if you like kind of weird, speculative horror that has really clever writing. The next book, again, I'm already questioning my ranking of these books because this is probably objectively a better book than The Appeal. But I had so much fun with this that I put it higher. So The Appeal is a kind of cozy mystery where we're basically following this small town, and it's like a theatre group. Somebody ends up dying and you're basically reading like a case file which a lawyer has put together, and your job is basically to read all these like text messages, emails, leaflets, things like that, and try and work out what happened. This was just so fun. It's over 400 pages and I absolutely flew through it. It's literally just a bunch of emails and it feels like you're snooping through somebody's private life. I love stuff like that. It's full of like gossip, family drama, and I just had so much fun reading it. I was so into it by the end. I just sat and read like 200 pages of it all in one go because I was so desperate to find out what happened. I loved all the twists at the end. I loved how it all came together, and I gave it a 5-star because I just had the most fun reading it. Janice Hallett also has quite a few other books that are kind of similar to this, whether it's like mixed media, and I will be reading all of them. So yeah, I'm currently reading The Christmas Appeal, but I'm not very far in, so I can't really tell you much about that. But if you like cozy mysteries, it's got quite a lot of humour in there, but also it has some really good twists at the end, then you would probably love this one. Okay, so we're up to my top 3 books now. So the first one that I want to mention is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is a sci-fi book and we're following this guy called Ryland, who's basically woken up on a spaceship with absolutely no memory of why he's there, what he's supposed to be doing, and we're basically just following him along as he's trying to work out what he needs to do to get back home. And as the story progresses, we start to question whether Ryland is really alone out in space, and this book was just perfect. It was so lovely. The audiobook is 100% the best way to read this book. The way that that was produced was just amazing. The voice acting, the way that it handles a specific characterization was just absolutely perfect and warmed my heart so much. This book made me cry, this book made me laugh, it made me smile. It has a perfect ending that I honestly couldn't have wanted anything more from. Some of it is so tense and thrilling, especially as you're starting to wonder whether he's going to come out of this situation alive. And although this is a heavy sci-fi book, I felt like a lot of the science was written in a really approachable way where it kind of made sense, or most of it did anyway. I feel like you don't have to love sci-fi to love this book. I think this is probably one of my 5 stars that I would widely recommend. I think it would appeal to a lot of people, and I feel like a lot of people could get something from this book. And even if you're not a fan of sci-fi, then still give this one a go because the science is honestly quite easy to understand, and I wouldn't let that put you off because you're missing out on such a great story otherwise. My next favourite book, which is taking the number 2 spot, is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This book is quite a dark and disturbing story about a 15-year-old girl called Vanessa who starts a relationship with her 42-year-old English teacher. And we're able to see how this relationship starts and also how it progresses, but then we're also following Vanessa when she's in her 30s and seeing the effects that this relationship has had on her, the trauma that she's experienced, and the difficulties that she's having in accepting that the relationship was abusive and not really being able to process it and move on. This story was just so heartbreaking and sad, but also very beautiful, and I think a very important story to read. It just shows that there's no such thing as the perfect way to deal with this. Vanessa in her 30s still defends her English teacher even when all these other allegations start popping up. And it's a lot about how Vanessa frames that relationship in her mind in order to just survive. And the thought of acknowledging it for what it was is just too hard and too difficult, to think that her whole life has been shaped by this man who was actually very manipulative and abusive. So it's very dark, it's very heavy. I felt very emotionally drained when I finished this book, but I feel like it gave me a whole new understanding into what being a victim of this kind of abuse is like. I feel like these kinds of relationships are very misunderstood, and Vanessa ends up blaming herself and thinking that she actually kind of instigated it. And I feel like that whole side of it is something that I don't really see in fiction, and I think it's so important to read about stories like this, which happen so often and are so misunderstood, and there's a lot of victim blaming and shaming going on, whereas this book I think handles the whole situation in such a sensitive way, and it just broke me, but in a good way, because I'm so glad that I read it. But I couldn't read anything else for a few days because I was just so like drained. But if you're interested in those kinds of topics and you want to learn a little bit more, then this book is an excellent example of all of those topics done in the right way. And then my number 1 book of the year I think is a little bit controversial because I wouldn't say it's like objectively an amazing book, but it just was amazing for me. And that was True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. Now, if you've read this book and you're thinking like, that was just okay. You need to understand how this book just came into my life at the perfect time. So this book frames itself as if it's true crime. So it's about this missing girl called Zoe Nolan, and she was going to Manchester University and she disappeared. And the author of this book, Joseph Knox, is actually a character in this book. So he's editing a book, like a true crime book, about this fictional case, and he's used all these interview transcripts, photos, newspaper articles, editor's notes and letters with the original writer. So it's mixed media, but it's mostly told in interview transcripts, and something about this book just spoke to me so much. Basically, I could not stop reading it, and I ended up taking loads and loads of notes because I really wanted to figure out what was going on. And I truly think that the stars aligned when I read this, because I did manage to work it out, but at the perfect moment. So I figured it out so close to the end when it was basically going to be revealed itself anyway. So I was so happy that it was something that could actually be worked out and didn't rely on this big shocking twist ending which nobody would have ever seen coming. But I also didn't work it out too early, and it was such like a satisfying thing to be able to get it right. I did manage to predict quite a few of the twists, but only because I was like working it out alongside the book. So I found that whole experience so fun. It had the perfect amount of creepiness, and the way that it all wrapped up and ended was just perfect, I think. I feel like it answered just enough of my questions, but still left a little something there which made it feel really scary and really creepy. I loved the university setting. It really brought me back to when I was at uni. It felt very realistic. I was so interested in all the characters and their backstories and their families. I was just like so obsessed, and I don't know what it was. I don't know why it like had such an effect on me, but I feel like it was just written for me in a way. I feel like I just must have picked this book up at the perfect time, where I had the time to fully like invest my whole brain into it, and the way that it felt like a mystery that I could actually unravel, and the pieces started coming together at all the right times. It just, everything fell into place. For me, this is my favourite book of the year, but mainly because I had the best reading experience. I'm not sure that I would widely recommend this again as like, oh my god, you need to read this book. If you like books like The Appeal, you like books that read a little bit like true crime, and you like kind of involving yourself into a mystery and mixed media, then I feel like this would be a really good pick. So yeah, if you're anything like me, then I think you would really enjoy this book. But I'm also a little bit wary of recommending it as like my #1 book of the year, because a lot of the reviews that I've seen for this have been pretty mediocre. So I don't know if it's just a me thing. But that is all of the books that I have to talk to you about. Those were my 10 favourite books of this year. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please let me know what your favourite books of this year have been, or if you've read any of these books that I've mentioned, or if you want to read them now that I've talked about them. So thank you for watching this video. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!